welcome to Policing TV, and welcome back to you, Lydia, for the second part of our interview.
Thank you.
In the first interview we had, you spoke about your extensive and varied and fantastic career you've had with North Yorkshire Police. The second part, this interview, I would like you to talk about, and I want to ask you some questions about your experience of policing overseas. So you've taken that fantastic career to date, which isn't finished, potentially in UK policing, and then done what I consider to be a really challenging role, and that's translating that into overseas to help other countries, in your case, build capability, particularly around that specialism of child protection. So thanks again for joining us. I'll pass over to you to talk us through that. I'll dive in on occasions just to unpick a couple of things, but I'll let you talk us through your, to date, again, amazing career in supporting policing and child protection overseas.
Okay, thank you. So I was at North Yorkshire, I think, as Chief Inspector when we left off. But so what then happened is an opportunity came up. And it came as a 1 month secondment to the NCA, the NCA CEOP, as it was. And originally that was for a 1 month deployment to Kenya. And what was happening is that there was a joint programme ongoing between the NCA and FCDO to set up a child protection unit in Kenya. And they were looking for a sort of specific skill set area to deploy out with the team for a month to train and mentor them. So I applied for that role and was successful in getting it. 1 month with the NCA became, I think it was about 3.5 years. So it was a slightly longer secondment than planned. But the first month I was in Kenya, and I can safely say it was fantastic in terms of an experience. I was working very closely with the officers there, so we would train them, and then we would stay out there with them, deploy with them in a mentoring role to sort of embed some of the learning from the training. It's a unit very close to my heart, the Kenyan unit, and I'll explain that later. I've stayed involved very much with that Kenya project. But after we'd done the Kenya project, an opportunity came up where the FCDO came to the NCA to look at setting up a project with the British Overseas Territories. And they were looking for, essentially, they were wanting to develop child protection, child safeguarding within the British Overseas Territories. And they wanted a law enforcement support in order to do that, which is where the NCA got involved and our project team came into fruition. So what that was looking at was working with the British Overseas Territories to improve their child protection mechanisms. And that wasn't just to sort of go and train the police. It was looking at the whole sort of victim's journey, that investigative journey, what that looked like and where the gaps were and how we could support that country to fill those gaps. So that was sort of the project for the next sort of just over 3 years. I know I mentioned some challenging roles previously, but without doubt, some of the most challenging positions I've found myself in. It's funny with the British Overseas Territories, because we were a project that was funded through the FCDO and almost pushed upon the bots rather than something they were requesting. It didn't always make us the most popular. And what you also find with the British Overseas Territories is very, very sadly, they are overscoped and under-supported. So you get all sorts of project teams coming from government, from charities, from official organisations. They come into the country, they point out everything that's wrong, and then they leave a big chunky report that sits on a shelf, and then they leave, and nothing or very little can come of it. And it's really sad. We were seeing that happen a lot. So when we introduced ourselves and said we're another team coming to scope, it received some quite negative feedback. So our first challenge was to overcome that and then explain we're not just here for a one-stop visit. We're not just going to tell you where the problems are and leave. we're going to set up an action plan, a support plan, and explain how we can help you fill those gaps, essentially. So it's funny, sometimes you'd go to a country and you'd have leadership support, but on the ground, nope. Sometimes you'd have on the ground support, but leadership, nope. And sometimes you'd have no and no, which is where it was really, really challenging to almost go and sort of sell yourselves as a team to offer support and try and provide it in a positive way. And this is, and these are some of the reasons why it was so challenging, because I think when I said to people, I'm working on the British Overseas Territories, I spend quite a lot of time in the Caribbean, so I'm going to Turks and Caicos, to Anguilla, to Montserrat, to Bermuda. They're like, oh wow, that just sounds delightful. You're just you're just on a big jolly. And I think sometimes people go into overseas policing with that mindset that, oh, it's just policing on a beach. How hard can it be? Really hard is the answer to that one. It's really hard, and I don't think it's the right role for everybody. And having run the project team, and I seconded officers into our team, and I was deploying them either with me or to support me in different countries. Some worked, some were good, some really didn't work. I think when you're working with countries, you need to remember that. So I'm being brought onto this project team as a child protection specialist. So I'm good at what I do in terms of child protection, but I'm good at what I do in the UK because that's what I know. But when you're going into these countries, you are not an expert in that country. You might be an expert in your topic area, but they are the experts in that country. They know how that country works. They know how crimes do or don't get reported. They know how people will respond. They know how the courts work. So if you go in with this very UK-centric, fixed mindset, it doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work, because you are not taking into account the sort of cultural contexts, the nuances that are very, very different. And it's different in every single country. So it's not like I can go to Turks and Caicos and be the same as I was in Kenya or be the same as I was in the Falklands, because every single one requires a different approach. And you have to learn it on the job in some ways, because you don't know the types of people you're going to encounter. You don't know their feelings towards you. So every time you start with a new country, you're starting from scratch. And it's having a level of humility and understanding of that country and of their priorities and what they do or don't want from you. And for me, it was always about focusing on the sort of the more positive things. So, I'm not here to tell you what to do, because that wouldn't be right. But I can try and support your teams in doing the right thing. And we always, and I was lucky to have this, in your back pocket, because it's always about the children. It's always about the children. So when you're sort of trying to get your point across at a very senior level, governor level or minister level, we can always take it back to, we're not doing this because I've got an ego and I want to make a big difference. We're doing this for the children in your country, who are potentially at risk if we don't do this. So it was, as long as we could find that supporting evidence base, and I remember being in one country, and you'll probably know which country this is, where the governor told me, this isn't a problem here. We don't have a problem with child abuse here. And then I remember showing the Attorney General and the Chief Justice. I didn't show them any images, but I showed them some descriptors of peer-to-peer sharing of images that was taking place in that country, and their faces. We need to change this. And at that point, there was no legislation for online child abuse, and thankfully that has now changed. It took some time, but that's and that for me is such a big thing, because you've now got a country that can actually go some ways to protecting children online in that respect. So yeah, I've digressed a little bit there, but so I spent sort of over 3 years on this project team, and it was challenging, but we had some great successes as well. And like I was saying, one of our approaches was, we weren't just a dip in, dip out, train for a week and then leave. our sort of philosophy around the training was we would always follow it up with a period of mentoring. So whenever we train something, we would stay in country and work with the operational teams to embed that into their sort of day-to-day practice. An example of that was the ABE interviewing. So it's very easy, particularly when ABE is being introduced as a brand new concept. It's quite alien to some of the police forces we were working with, and very, very different to what they were used to, and culturally not something that they would ever have entertained previously. So we were very sort of gradual with how we introduced ABE training, and again, not just saying, right, after this 2-week course, we're going to leave and you just crack on with your ABE interviews. Because for a start, you need to make sure that they are part of the judicial process and they can actually be used in evidence. Because if not, what's the point? And we had to do some workarounds in order to make sure that they were being used in the right way. But after the training, we would then work with the teams. So their next ABE interviews that they're doing for real in the real world, we would support them. So we were never allowed to be sort of in an investigative role, but we were there as a supportive role to guide them and sort of handhold through those first initial ABEs. And I remember myself when I was ABE trained, and you do it in your fake situations, and it's all a bit of a laugh, and you sort of learn from it. And then you go out to do your first one. And it's like, oh no, this is for real now. There's a real victim now. I need to remember all my training. I need to do this properly. I'm really nervous. What if I get it wrong? And so you know the situation that these officers are in, having never done this before, and it being a very alien concept. So we were always there to support that. One of the big things about working overseas is anything you're doing needs to be sustainable. It needs to be something that when you leave is something that's going to last and has a lasting impact. So there's no point going and doing any training course, ABE or anything, if as soon as you leave, it's not going to get used or it's going to revert back to how it was done before. That it's pointless. It's a completely pointless exercise and it's a waste of money. And that was something, because we were using sort of government funds. Everything we needed to do had to have a purpose and had to have a sustainable element to it. And again, that's a good sell for the countries, because you're sort of saying we're not just coming to dip in and dip out. We are really passionate about leaving behind a good legacy and something that has some sustainability element. So that was really key to that sort of overseas working element. So yeah.
Lydia, just touching on that, I mean, this is your interview. It's not about me, but I spent 10 years overseas, and one of my key frustrations was just what you were touching on, and the expression, overscoped and undersupported. Unfortunately, is where the UK government got a lot of things wrong, right back to the child protection issues on Saint Helena over a decade ago. So I think the success of your project was, one, it was you and your team, and we had various touch points in there where we worked together on some of this. So I saw it with my own eyes, but I know it's replicated on other territories. Just, you talked about the mentoring. Can you just give us a flavour from your perspective? How critical as a success factor is that mentoring? Because you articulated it really well. This was a completely new concept. This wasn't even something in different countries they've even heard of. At least as a UK officer, you go to a ABE course, you know what the course is, you know what ABE is, you know how successful it can be, and you aspire to be that person who can do that. And I think what people sometimes miss is this, as an example, was a completely new concept. Completely, no one in the force had encountered it. So how important do you think a success factor that mentoring is? And it will cross over a multitude of training, whether it's firearms or lots of things. But in this case, it was ABE, and which is something I saw with my own eyes. Because what you haven't mentioned is it became completely mainstream after what you did. Now that's a success, but the factor of mentoring, how important is that? Because you also mentioned that in Kenya.
Yeah. It's, for me, it's absolutely vital. And for me, it's what makes something have some longevity and have some sustainability. But what I would sort of caveat with is it has to be the right mentors. It absolutely has to be the right people, because again, I've left mentors behind in country and they've caused me more problems than supported in those countries. So it has to be the right people that have a level of humility, that understand that this is how an ABE looks in perfection, in absolute textbook. But we might not get that here because of the cultural differences, the recording system, the way they speak, the way they address people. We might not get what we would think is a textbook ABE, but we've got something that is one a hell of a lot better than what they had before, but is good enough to be able to support those victims through that process. But you get people that are like, well, that this isn't how we do it in the UK. And if anybody said that to me, it was pretty much a red light. You unfortunately, you don't belong on this team, and you can't work overseas if you've got that mentality. And don't get me wrong, it's not about sort of impacting standards or accepting lesser standards. It's about applying a standard that works for that country. And that's why the mentoring is so important, because we've seen it a lot with overseas support, and you see it with NGOs working with countries. They go and do an awareness session or a sensitization session or a training session, and it changes nothing, because they don't leave behind anything that is then that people understand. And that's, again, like you were saying, the ABE was an alien concept. So if we could then sit in on those first few ABE interviews that they're doing and say, right, think about this, don't forget to do this, and just be that sort of guiding voice in their head. You've maybe missed that question, or and then at the end, debrief it fully, and say, right, when you did your intro, you need to remember to get this bit in, or just trying to make it sound less like you're reading stuff out, whatever it might be, all those tips and advice. It gives people the confidence to then do it again and again. And also, it's not just about finding fault. It's about saying, yeah, that question, fantastic. That is how you need to start every ABE interview. So it boosts people's confidence in doing it. And I remember being in the TCI and one particular officer almost hiding when it came to an ABE, because I knew it wasn't because she wasn't competent at all. I'd seen her do it in practices. She was just terrified. She was just terrified of doing it. And without us there to recognize that and be able to support her, she might never have gone into that interview room. So you're applying a bit of pressure, like, Officer so-and-so, I think it's your turn now. I'm going to be here with you, though. I'm here with you every step of the way. We're a team. And building that confidence. Yourself from going on training courses. I remember, the surveillance course. I did the course, passed the course, but I was still terrified on day one of going out on surveillance. And they'll be the same with those ABE interviews. Nobody wants to get it wrong. And particularly when you're dealing with such sensitive cases, and the majority were involving children over in TCI, they don't want to get that wrong, because that's really important later at court. So if we can be there for that period to build that confidence, and like you say, it leaves something behind. So ABE becomes mainstream rather than them just doing it because we were there. It becomes something they recognise as a good thing and something that is positive for their cases.
And they start seeing the success as well once you get through the criminal justice system. And
absolutely.
So the cut and thrust of the overseas territories, and I know you had a period back in the UK after that project finished with the international team in the Home Office.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear about that a little bit, but I'm then interested how you translated all this fantastic operational training development experience as you stepped into the more academic world in the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, I had a year with the Home Office. Again, it was great for me because it was a whole different sort of insight into sort of how support to overseas countries is given, how it's bid for, how it's funded. The slightly challenging thing with that particular secondment was it was during COVID. So trying to do overseas reform and support from your bedroom wasn't quite so easy. And we were doing some projects with Mexico, with Pakistan, with Malta, and having some really good meetings. But where then that progress would be seen more in country, it was a lot more challenging to do from overseas. So I did a year with that, and again, had some really good learning. Got to work on some really interesting projects. There was a lot of internal politics going on as well, which made that a little bit more challenging. So then it was kind of out of the blue, through a LinkedIn approach, that I was offered an opportunity to, like you say, go and work in academia. It was an area I have a lot of interest in, having done the masters, and seen the growth of your sort of evidence-based policing approaches and the importance of academia in supporting policing. It was an area that really interested me. So I was offered a contract to go and be a lecturer and researcher over in Abu Dhabi. And it was a good opportunity, I felt, to do something a little bit different and a little bit new, and add another string to the bow in terms of another experience, but still remaining within policing and also within child protection. So I was lucky. I led on the child protection module whilst I was there. I also got to do research in child protection. So taking it back to the Kenya project, I ended up back in Kenya whilst I was working over in Abu Dhabi, and doing some data collection and research with the Kenya Child Protection Unit there. And I've been lucky now. I'm published as an academic writer, which I'm really proud of, because it's not something I ever saw myself doing, having not gone to uni and then sort of battling through the masters in and amongst a quite busy policing role. So to sort of build that academic experience, I really value. I got to lecture, so I got to talk to sort of new police officers and sort of instill my passion of policing and child protection into them. And I loved that. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the lecturing side. I had some great students, and I felt hopefully that they got some positive out of some of my experiences as well. I probably wasn't your classic academic lecturer, and I did used to caveat the start of my modules with I'm a bit more operational than I am academic, so bear with me. But I was able to develop much more of an understanding about the academic theory side and apply it to your mainstream policing. And like I say, really value that I got to actually publish research in an area I feel really passionate about, which is developing overseas support in child protection. So it was a great 3 years, really enjoyable 3 years, and one that I really value in terms of my own kind of personal development as well.
Yeah, that's and another part of the world with entirely different culture as well, which
Yeah,
I've
yes.
not worked there, but I know it's different. So that was also a challenge, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, similar to some of the countries we worked with on the other programs. Very different values, very different approaches. And child protection is always a very discussed topic in terms of, we the chastisement side always creates a big conversation, I think it's fair to say, in some of these countries. And I know you're familiar with it from the Caribbean side, but
Yes.
similar sort of discussions taking place in the Middle East as well, around what's acceptable, around your sort of family units, keeping things very confidential, sensitive, and dealing with things internally. So yeah, some challenging kind of concepts and cultural differences to deal with.
Okay. Now, to bring us up to date, then, because your career has taken another slight turn. Um, so now working more in the, I think it's fair to say, charity sector.
Mhm.
Again, another turn, as I say. So how did that come about? And I know you're relatively new into it, but if you give us a flavour of where we are with that and some of the work
Yeah.
you're getting involved in.
So, Childlight is the organisation I'm with now. They're hosted by the University of Edinburgh, and funded through the Human Dignity Foundation. But they're a global child safety institute. And the idea is they're using research and data to drive activity in combating child exploitation and abuse. As an organisation, they fascinated me right from their setup. They're quite a new organisation, so still developing a lot. But I went to a conference last year where I presented some of my research in Kenya, and Childlight were hosting the conference. And I remember listening to a lot of the talks and thinking, this is an organisation I really sort of respect and value. And it was whilst I was over in Abu Dhabi, there was a job advert came up with Childlight, and when you read a job description and think, goodness, this was written for me, because it was all the overseas working experience, obviously child protection experience, developing countries, and then also they were looking for some sort of research and academic background as well. So as soon as I read the job description, I thought, this is, I really, really want this. And I really feel like I'd be good at it and I could make a difference in it. So very, very lucky to be successful in the application process. So I've been with them for just coming up for 2 months now. So still very early stages, but our roles. So as I've mentioned, they focus very much on the research and data side. And I'm kind of supporting some of that research at the moment. But also our sort of side of the house, if you like, is the technical advisory program side. So where the research and data takes us, we kind of slot in as the operational support. So we will work with countries across the world where they want to improve their systems and processes in child protection. And we can kind of go where the data tells us. So at the moment, we're working, Childlight produce an Into the Light index. So they look at the prevalence and typology of abuse. So we're working on the index for next year, and we're looking at every country, so all sort of 196 Interpol countries, looking at their systems in terms of dealing with child protection, and almost looking at grading those systems. So we understand then those that are falling behind potentially, and it helps us to be able to prioritize some of our activities. So those that we're finding have the biggest gaps or are struggling in terms of moving on their child protection systems, we can kind of come in as program advisors and give some support and help in that area. So it's in some ways very similar to the work I was doing before, but a little bit more supported by data and by research and where that is telling us where the problems are essentially.
Would that get published? Because that's never been done before, I'm sure.
Yes,
And it'd be
so
fascinating to see, and probably slightly alarming for some countries, I would guess. But that would be published, because that would be an interesting.
the
read.
idea is we will build to that. Yes, so we're very early stages at the moment, but yeah, the idea is that we would build having that as a sort of on almost like a mapping on our website that shows where the countries are at essentially. But we're working a lot on that grading system at the moment, because obviously we need to be very careful around our approach with that, because like you say, it might not always be seen favourably in some ways.
No. Fascinating. It's going to keep you busy, I guess, I think, for
very
for the months and probably years ahead. Lydia, I've been fascinated by this session. It's hearing about, I knew a little bit about your work overseas just because you worked in the TCI when I was out there, but to hear the breadth of it. You have had an astonishing career, and it's not finished yet, of course. You're
still going.
kind of going through. Given my background, I'm particularly interested in your work overseas, and I find it fascinating. And there's very few people with your breadth of overseas from different cultures to actually doing different things abroad. So it'd be remiss of me not to finish with the final question, really. So, what advice would you give a UK police officer who's highly skilled, highly experienced in a role, in a subject, in a specialism, who would be looking perhaps to work overseas and who might deploy overseas? How would you summarise then your advice to people who are looking to do that?
Mm-hmm. I think, sort of picking up on some of my points from before, I think have some humility. Remember that, like you say, you might be the expert in whatever your subject matter is, but you're not the expert in that country. So have some humility. Go in curious around that country and how they do things. Ask questions. Don't assume you know because you're an expert in that particular field. I would say talk to others that have been out there or that have got some experience of overseas working. It is not the same as working at home. It's much more challenging, and I think speaking to others, you get a sort of understanding of some of the challenges you might face. Do some research beforehand as well. So do some research around that country. Get to know some of the cultural nuances, some of that context, so you have a good understanding of what you're going into. But most of all, I think the humility element. If you go in bullish and I don't know, if you have that approach, you will fail. So I don't know. We use the word kind, don't we? But you're having that almost sort of kind and understanding approach. Little tiny things from respecting clothing, respecting meal times or prayer times, or just these little things can make a difference. How you address someone. If it's a first names place, great. If it's a surnames place, use the surnames. If it's a no, Mr. or Sir, then use those. You're not more important than anybody. So it's sort of recognize that and be very mindful, I think, of your approach with people, and have an understanding of their approaches to things, and you need to fit in with that. It's you're a guest in that country, and yes, you might be going in to help, but you still want people to respect you and to listen to you. So prove that you're worthy of that respect, and have a sort of a good approach. Show some humility with that approach, I think.
What an excellent way to bring this interview to a close. Really, I mean, absolutely sound advice. I hope anyone listening to this, if they are thinking of going overseas, listens to those last 2 minutes, really, because it's absolutely critical. Lydia, it's been delightful to talk to you. I'm really grateful. You've had and are still having the most extraordinary career, both in the UK, protecting those vulnerable children in North Yorkshire, but also more broadly overseas. And you've got such a depth of experience overseas. It's extraordinary, and all credit to you. And you've been successful. And I wish you all the best with the work with the charity, which the reach of that is really going to outdo everything you've done so far. So I'll watch with interest. I'd be very keen to see what comes out of that with the data and then what follows up. But for now, Lydia, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure that the people who tune into Policing TV will find your stories so far fascinating. And someone somewhere 10 years down the line needs to check in with you again just as a follow-up, because I think there's more to come. But Lydia, for now, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much.